There are pilot projects everywhere, but it only gets fun if we roll out the big project. But how do we do that, and what is needed for the industry to go to the big next thing in hydrogen? We're going to discuss that with Oliver Weinmann, Managing Director of Vattenfall Innovation and Board Member of Hydrogen Europe, Oliver Bishop, General Manager Hydrogen at Shell, and Götz Hanau, Head of Strategy Development at RWE. Well, the basic open question to all of you is, what is your big next thing or big next announcement that we can expect anytime soon? Mr. Weinmann of Vattenfall, what is your next big hydrogen announcement going to be?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for being here. I'm really glad to join this the summit. Next big thing, where we will have an announcement on the first real commercial hydrogen installation, mid-size, hopefully beginning of next year. Okay. So it's not depending on funding, so it's commercial, not R&D, it's real commercial.
A real project. Commercial one. And are there subsidies involved, or you paid it all by yourself?
No, it's subsidies involved, but it's not any R&D subsidies. It's different kind of fundings.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Bishop, you opened your first hydrogen gas station in the Netherlands for small cars last month. What is your next milestone?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry it's not in person. Last year it was, but thank you for this invitation. Our next big thing is a very large electrolyzer at Rotterdam. So it's pre-FID, but next year we hope to get to that point, 150 megawatts at least, in and around the port of Rotterdam. So that's probably the next biggest thing, but also just cast your mind back only a few weeks where Shell made an announcement about 50 more hydrogen refueling stations in California that serves the light duty network. We've got several heavy duty truck stations just about to open also in California. That will be subject to an announcement in the next few months, and another bus station in the Netherlands. So it's a lot happening, and we can talk more about that during the course of this.
It's a lot happening. Then Mr. Hanau of RWE, can you top this?
We are in a bit of a different business field, but thanks first of all to invite me here for this panel discussion. Happy to elaborate a bit on our activities. We are of course active in the GetH2 initiative, which is a 100 megawatts hydrogen generation facility with partners in the site of Lingen, so in Germany. So that is something where we are preparing, of course, for FID, and we plan to become operative actually in 2024 if everything works well. Well, if regulation, etc., works, maybe even faster. Then, of course, I mean, we have our engagement, our activities around Eemshaven. So Eems Hydrogen is our project, 50 megawatt upscale, directly linked to one of the largest onshore wind farms, West Eems in the Netherlands, in the northern Netherlands. And of course, I mean, we are preparing and we are in talks to further scale up by partnering, and hopefully that will also materialize and develop in the near future.
Okay, so some big things are quite literally in the pipeline. We're going to talk about how do we get one of these pilots, how do we scale it up, how do we roll out commercial activities. For you at home, the question is, what do you think is the showstopper? What is the one thing that is holding us back from implementing hydrogen at a large scale? Is it technology? We just need to research and discover new things. Is it closing the business case? We first need to see how to make a profit before we can do it. It's the rules and regulations. We want to, but it takes too much effort to get a permit, or the regulations are wrong, or nothing really. The industry just should get to work and roll it out on a big scale. Ben, why is it important that we discuss this?
Well, we want to scale up, right?
Yeah.
So showstoppers prevent us from scaling up. That's the obvious reply I'm going to give. I'm just watching the numbers coming. So closing the business case. So it's counting the money that counts in the end for scaling up. And I hear the gentleman wanted to say partners. I'm just curious about this partner thing for those who mentioned. I think it was Oliver and Hanau who mentioned those things. So why are partners important? I mean, is it you can't finance it all yourself? Is there not money enough around? What are these partners necessary for in your scale-up journey? I'll take Oliver from Shell first. I'll call you Shell, Oliver.
You call me Shell's bishop, if you like. That's what someone in the media once wrote of me. Because Shell does infrastructure. So, for example, in transportation, we're building the infrastructure, and you need the vehicles. And so those two things, it's the classic chicken and egg. Those two things need to be synchronized as much as possible. And a very good example of that is H2 Mobility joint venture in Germany. But actually, every single thing that we are doing has partners. If I look at what we're doing in California, it's very closely tied with Toyota and Honda, again, for the vehicles, same on the trucks. And it's the same, actually, very much on industrial projects. The partner may be the government, for instance, for
But why is it? Is it to spread the risk, to learn from each other's technology, or just because it's more fun?
Well, it's certainly fun working with this community. It's a very small world. No, I mean, it's a variety of things. It is to enable the demand piece. From my perspective, happy to provide the infrastructure, but of course the demand piece is terribly important for the economics, for de-risking these projects, for scaling up. Sometimes it's partnering for technology. Actually, there are multiple different aspects that you can look at from a partnering point of view. And it depends on the project. Technology, financing, it can be access to demand, it could be access to real estate, it could be access to renewable electrons, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure the other colleagues here can add more to this.
Yeah, and so an overwhelming majority of reviewers says the showstopper is closing the business case. And while we open the app for your open questions and remarks that we'll enter into discussion at one point, Mr. Hanau, what would you say is the showstopper?
Well, indeed, it is, of course, that there is yet no business case really feasible. And that is, of course, something where we have to have a perspective on regulation, but also on infrastructure. Regulation is, of course, quite handy to ask for in the sense of for closing the bill and creating demand. That's more our viewpoint, which we need to develop. And that also knocks into the point of partnering, which we just discussed. We do see also this emerging at the moment in the beginning with the lack of the infrastructure, that you have to have end-to-end perspective on a project development and to make it possible to scale. And that requires also capabilities which we do have access to within RWE, but it's not our core activity. That is, of course, starting with the demand, but also with the logistics. In terms of transportation, you can't transport the molecules at the moment, but you can transport the grid, but both is not in our accessory. So I think it's important to have the right partners to develop this end-to-end and then to develop also a market to it. And that also might be the bridge for developing something which is then making a business case. You have then a cost reduction in scaling, and you might apply different market possibilities and regulation words by having a market developed. But that is a long way.
But if you just heard the previous speakers, they all said in a short while, the demand will be so ginormous, there will be a market for every molecule of hydrogen produced. So it's business case on the producing side, any question.
But for the logistics, you have the constraints, at least speaking for Germany and the Netherlands, on the grid, on the power grid so far. So it's not that you can have all the build-ups and the renewable build-up. You would need to be transported to the southern part or to the industrial areas to have a decentral, or to have a hydrogen production close to the industry application, at least not at the scale as required. Nor you have yet the regulation to have really hydrogen fed into a hydrogen grid in the scale needed. So you will have that bridge come over in order to scale indeed, and also then have the cost effect. Yeah,
Mr. Weinmann?
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest showstopper for rolling out large scale?
It's of course always a business case at the end. If we go large scale, we need to make money. So you can afford burning money in an R&D project, but if we go really large scale, 100 megawatt and above, we need to make money with this kind of projects. Here, the showstopper is to our opinion, to our knowledge, it's not technology. So we can electrolyzer is not rocket science. It's a 100-year-old technology. Of course, it can always be improved, but it's there. So it's major technology. So for the business case, we are competing to establish business cases like Oliver Bishop mentioned in transportation. It's diesel and gasoline. In steel production, it's with coke, steel production with coke, which is a technology in place since 100 years. And if in the beginning we are more expensive with green hydrogen or clean hydrogen compared to these kind of established technologies, and then here we have to overcome this market entry, and therefore we need subsidies, and we need appropriate regulations, and these are the both major things we need in the near future. Regulations is on top of all, because regulation, we are an energy business, and we know regulation is always dominating the business case. So
but
business
Mr.
case
Weinmann,
depends heavily on regulation in our business. So we have to adapt regulation, and we need funding, at least in the first phase of the rollout.
Okay, but you're a big company. I think you can raise some capital. You have a sound business case for the future. Why don't you do the investments yourself? Why do you rely on the taxpayers for your future profits?
Or to ask the question differently, are we not just too short-sighted when looking at these business cases?
Yeah, on the long run, there will be business cases, of course, but we have we have this phase to really step into the market, and as explained, we are competing to establish technologies, and we have a regulation scheme in place which doesn't really favor green products, to be honest. So we have a CO2 tax, which is minor in most of the countries, European countries, and we have a quite high burden on green electricity and to produce green hydrogen, and this doesn't help to come into business. So we need to change the regulation to create a sound business case. We have niches today, yeah, okay, right, but for mass rollout, for big rollout of these technologies, this will need a change in regulation.
But may I summarize you? If the regulators do their work properly and create a proper level playing field, all those subsidies are not needed anymore?
on a mid to long run, yes, but in the beginning, since we need to improve the technology further, we will need subsidies as well.
Yeah, Mr.
For the market to ramp up, we will need subsidies as well. In the long run, this technology must survive without subsidies. Otherwise, there's no chance.
Mr. Bishop, if the regulators do their work properly, could you do without subsidies? Or would you just invest? It's a long-term investment in the end you will earn back, or can't we without?
I point to some of the activity that we have in California on light duty stations, and what we've seen there is that a supportive policy on, so for instance, getting rewarded with LCFS credits for bringing capacity, so building the station ahead of the demand, has been incredibly helpful for us to then basically put an order book in for, say, 50 stations, because once you do that, you are then able to get substantial cost out of the system. It's not just Shell in this case, it's all the other suppliers beyond Shell that also need to reduce costs. So when it's quite easy just to say, oh, a Shell should actually go and get the cost out, but actually the rest of the supply chain needs to catch up. And what I see on the light duty side is actually line of sight to competitiveness with gasoline over the next few years. Of course, heavy duty is some way behind that. You're still at prototype stage with the trucks, with some of the very first trucks, say, e.g. from Hyundai coming onto the market. And I would say the same with electrolysis. What you see there is that in Germany, Shell's built this, we're just finishing the construction of 10 megawatt electrolyzer and now stepping up to the next order of magnitude. And when you do that, even though, yes, absolutely, Mr. Weinmann's right, this is actually pretty old technology as such, still, people haven't scaled it yet to that stage. And so there's still risk that you're taking on. And actually by doing that, you will get further cost out of the system, and eventually you will get to a point where it becomes competitive. That being said, there are sectors that are more attractive than others. So transportation, which is why I talk a lot about transportation, is probably, let's say, quote unquote, the easiest sector to get after and get towards cost competitiveness. In industry, your issue is you're really, and if I look at, say, fertilizers, for example, which is a classic use of hydrogen, is one of the biggest consumers of hydrogen today, you're talking about, at the end, farmers buying fertilizers. And so, of course, it needs to be affordable. Now, that will be a challenge unless there are suitable policy instruments or price on carbon and such like introduced. So you have to pick your sector quite carefully, which one you're referring to. But I see line of sight, particularly in transportation, and particularly by 2030, will be very competitive.
Yeah. Mr. Hanau, if we hear all the things that you've just been announcing that are coming in the foreseeable future, have we solved the chicken and egg dilemmas with rolling out, and we just need to tweak a little bit the regulations and the subsidies, or do we still have mountains to move?
Well, there is still a bit of a way to go. Obviously, there is the one thing which is the earlier mover disadvantage, I would say. So there is yet no scaling, yet there are the investment costs and also the renewables build out not sufficiently done. So that will come, and that will, of course, with scaling also bring down the cost, as we just heard. The other thing is to have indeed a demand or a consideration of the emission reduction in the markets and in the products and by the customer in the end. And as Oliver just said, I think there is some sectors have a better chance to also transport that and accept a level. And then the regulation may create their paying level fields for emitting products and green products in the end to have that under the right incentive. And that will last, of course, for a longer thing. And I wouldn't call that then subsidies, but market design rather. And I think this is required to have the right incentives also for the customers to make the choice for the sustainable solution. But again, we will have to have a further step of scaling in order to get in a league of comparison of prices, and that will require the regulatory support to get started. Next to the topics which I mentioned with regard to the infrastructure, that you indeed have regulation in place, that you have the right incentives in place, These are all settings which will have a longer lasting horizon than just capex or some other subsidy request, because that is not paying the bill in the end alone.
Okay, that being said, there are many ways we can take hydrogen to. The question is, do we always take the most ecologically and economically sound, or do you also have different interests? We have a question to the audience. Can we move to the next question in the app? The question that we have to you is, we have a motion. Can we move? Yeah, can we move to the next question to the audience? Yeah, it's the motion is hydrogen is seen as the solution to climate transition, or are there also business reasons involved to step in the hydrogen business? You say agree or disagree, and basically to say it to summarize it, it's do the big companies get into the hydrogen business because it's the best for the planet and the people, or also because it's best to sustain their business models? Let's see what people say. So do people step into hydrogen business because it's good for the planet in the end? Or is it mainly because it's a way to sustain their business models? The first vote is going to agree. And so far, it looks a bit North Korean.
One vote.
Yeah. So Mr. Bishop, you just opened your first hydrogen station for consumer vehicles. Is that because you think there is an economic and ecological need for it, or is it because, well, if I charge my Tesla at home, you won't earn anything. If I have a hydrogen car, it's into your, that's also in your interest.
We should just qualify that it's the first hydrogen station for Shell in the Netherlands, but by far not the first hydrogen station that Shell is.
Shell in the Netherlands, yeah.
Absolutely. I just wanted to correct that for your viewers. Shell's in this as its business. Undoubtedly, this has to make business sense. A lot of the previous speakers have talked about a business case. Clearly, at the end of the day, there is and has to be a business case. We see a business case for this. And I think also our customers see a business case for this. If I look back, one of the reasons why hydrogen has suddenly got a lot of interest this time, as opposed to a few decade ago, is because there is a couple of recognitions. One is that societally, we need to decarbonize. The second is that solar and wind have come down in cost. Thirdly, electrolyzers have come down in cost. And perhaps the final point is there's a recognition that you can't decarbonize everything with electrons alone. And so there's a very strong need for a molecule, and hydrogen is one of those. Now, Shell is an energy company and is very, very good and capable at managing gases. So LNG, for instance, one of the pioneers in LNG, certainly before I was born, and it's very much in the similar vein. And the technical competence is there to do it. And this is absolutely in the wheelhouse of Shell's determination to as part of its net zero ambition. So yes, there is a business case for it, and we're going after it.
Yeah. Mr. Hanau, how do you decide where will be your next rollout? Is it based on market predictions? Is it based on your own business model that you can sustain, or where you can have the biggest carbon win?
Well, it is, of course, that we as RWE have a net zero 2040 plan, which is comprising a lot of our activities in the power sector, and also the bit where we are obviously in the conventional part still. So that is, of course, if you've asked really for the ramp down and the big challenge for us as a company on the carbon side, that is the angle. So entering into hydrogen is indeed for us a topic. If you ask for the business sense, it must make business sense. As we discussed already a bit, you can't have those scaling as an RD or pilot toppings. So we do see this with the renewables build out, which is our clear growth factor in the company, a classic link. And to have hydrogen is the integrated sector play, basically, to have the decarbonization also in the adjacent sectors of ours. We're coming from the perspective that we have the power sector and the optimization of assets, the engineering capabilities, and the system play to have that on the power side optimized. That is the role where we do see then, together with the access to the customers and the day-to-day business on commodities, that we do see that this is our remit, and we do see that there is a good ground for developing a business. Obviously, fitting to the strategy of net zero 2040, that's of course a driver as well to look into that field of business.
Yeah, Ben, if you listen to this, are you impressed by all the announcements and the rolling out the industry is doing right now? Or do you think, well, stop complaining so much about the regulatory affairs and just do more?
Well, I can understand why they want regulations in place that will allow them to do what they want to do. So getting the permits and those things becoming easier, I think that's just helping out business. On the level playing field, I understand there's a call for government to do things. I think they should take a bit longer perspective, and also a bit more longer strategic perspective. I think one of the interesting things, the gentlemen here around the table, is that they are now all energy companies, no longer oil and gas or power companies. They all claim to be energy companies. And I'm just wondering, in their plans, what strategic moves are they trying to make in hydrogen in order to, you know, fend off some competition around the table?
Yeah, Mr. Weinmann, how are you going to crush your competitors, or is the pie big enough for everybody to eat their share?
I guess at the end, the pie is big enough for everyone, and it's a big, huge business. So I did renewables 2 decades ago, and this was a big thing for utilities, and there was a complete paradigm shift in utilities. With renewables, so we stepped out of coal, we stepped out of gas, we stepped out of nuclear, and today Vattenfall is only investing in renewables. And the next big thing now is hydrogen. So we know energy transition or fulfilling the Paris Climate Agreement is only possible if we go green, and then we have to decarbonize industry and transport and heating as well. And this is not possible only with electrons. So we believed, or the whole branch believed in the past, there was all electric world and everything is done with electrons. We know this is not going to happen. So we need green molecules as well. And therefore, and this will be a big, huge market for everyone. On the other hand, of course, what is the competitive advantage of why do we think we are good positioned in this new market field? One thing is we are a key player in offshore wind. We are quite good on low cost production with renewables. And this is the key for cheap green hydrogen to be competitive.
Mr. Bishop,
we believe we are in a very good position to enter into this market.
Yeah. Mr. Bishop, will the titans of energy still be there in 50 years, or will you all be out Tesla'd by newcomers?
Well, we need to put this in context. By 2050, I believe the population will be somewhere around 9.8 billion people, and all of those want to have access to energy. And so this dual challenge of trying to get to a low carbon energy future whilst meeting those energy requirements is going to be with us for quite some time. But let me also explain what we're doing as part of that, even today, because the subject of this webinar is also a little bit around how do you go from pilot to scale. Yeah. And in a few words, we've done that in light duty, a handful of stations, to now getting towards 100 light duty hydrogen refueling stations. Done it the same in heavy duty. You see demonstration going now, starting to scale up those 3 heavy duty stations in California. You see it on electrolysis, 10 megawatts in Rhineland, and now going to 150 pre-FID. You see it on shipping, demonstration ship at the moment. So you can see all of these pieces start to come together in hydrogen, and then flanked either side by access to Shell's renewable power businesses, Shell's blue hydrogen business, or the carbon capture business, and then the downstream assets that Shell has, which has many refueling outlets and many B2B activities. And so that, in a nutshell, all serves to help towards reaching Shell's net zero ambition.
And are the most difficult times behind us, and from now it's only sunny, or do you see some more uphill battles?
Well, what you see in light duty, as I mentioned, is it's more, we are getting to the sunnier uplands. So we see that in cost reduction, tremendous cost has come out of the system, but we have to do the same for heavy duty, and you have to do the same in marine, and you have to do the same in industry. So
it's very industry dependent.
It's by segment, by segment, and some, unfortunately, for instance, marine and aviation will take quite a bit longer, maybe even quite a bit beyond 2030 for all of us, to actually get to that same point where we are on, say, light-duty refueling.
Okay, all of you have been mentioning that the biggest risks are on the biggest problems are on the regulatory side. So you all get one sentence. If you would be king of Europe for one day, what would you do? Mr. Hanau.
Well, I have never thought about that before, so give me a second. Now, I think important is indeed to have those unusable levies of the shelf. I mean, talking from Germany, the EEG levy, so the green, that is something which could be easily adjusted and to have a right pricing. So that is something which obviously is already stipulated but not yet implemented. Okay,
that would be you, Mr. Bishop. What would you do if you were king for a day?
Well, I would certainly continue on the pathway that we have with the EU Green Deal, for instance, but then at a level lower, define the standards that we need to determine green and blue hydrogen and the carbon intensity of each of those pathways. Let's be very clear on that. Let's also see national hydrogen strategies rolled out. Some countries are ahead of others. Let's see that conclude. Continue with the funding programs. I mentioned it's not just the shells in the world that benefit from a lot of these subsidies. It's the Mittelstand companies, say in Germany, that benefit from this. These small companies, very powerful, very important employers, actually, right across Europe, that we also need to manage the things like cost reduction on small components, compressors, all these sorts of pieces which are critically important, and continue to promote various instruments to close the affordability gap per sector.
Okay, Mr. Weinmann, how would you spend your day?
If I would be a king of Europe, I would start with a glass of champagne, probably, and the rest, I guess, has been said by Oliver and by Götz. So it's clearly it's harmonizing the European approach towards hydrogen and develop Europe as a competence center, as a leading region for hydrogen.
If I hear you gentlemen speak, I almost don't get the impression that at some level you're also competitors. You seem like one big happy family.
Yeah, it's still the reason it's still pre-competitive.
Okay, well that's good.
So let's talk in 2 years and then let's see how it will be then.
Well, it's always good to have a friendly atmosphere. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you, gentlemen.